In the quiet, slow-paced town of Greywood, life was predictable, and neighbors rarely locked their doors. Everyone knew everyone, and nothing truly shocking ever seemed to happen until the evening of October 14, 2005. That day began like any other for the Thompson family. Emily Thompson, their 12-year-old daughter, spent the afternoon at school and later played with friends at the park. She was cheerful, carrying her favorite blue backpack and wearing a scarf her grandmother had knitted for her the previous winter. But as the sun dipped behind the trees and the crisp autumn air settled in, Emily never came home. The first signs of trouble came when her mother called the park and learned Emily had left hours earlier. Panic grew quickly. Family members searched the neighborhood, calling her name, knocking on doors, and combing through nearby streets. Her father drove along every back road leading out of town. Finally, just before midnight, police joined the search. Her backpack was discovered abandoned near the old railway tracks that ran parallel to a wooded area on the edge of town. Inside were her schoolbooks, a half-eaten snack, and a note from her best friend. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints, no torn clothing, nothing to suggest where she had gone. Over the following days, the search widened. Volunteers, officers, and even trained dogs combed the woods and riverbanks. Helicopters scanned from above. Flyers with Emily's photo were posted on every shop window and telephone pole. Despite the community's efforts, there was no trace of her. As days turned into weeks, hope began to fade. Whispers of suspicion started circulating, hinting that perhaps the answer wasn't a stranger at all, but something far closer to home. The Thompson family stopped answering questions, and their once friendly smiles disappeared. The years that followed Emily's disappearance weighed heavily on Greywood. What was once a town filled with warmth and neighborly trust slowly became a place where glances carried suspicion. The Thompson home, once lively and welcoming, turned into a cold, shuttered shell. Curtains were always drawn, and the yard, once neatly kept, became overgrown with weeds. Inside the family, silence replaced conversation. Emily's parents, once a united couple, began to drift apart until a quiet divorce split them for good. Her older brother, Daniel, left town soon after, rarely returning or speaking of the past. Police never officially closed the case. Every few years, a detective would reopen the file, chasing new tips. A driver claimed to have seen a girl matching Emily's description walking along a highway far from Greywood. Another tip suggested she had been spotted in a shopping mall in another state. Each lead ended in frustration, leaving more questions than answers. As time went on, Emily's story became something of a haunting legend in the town. Parents warned their children about staying out late, and strangers were met with quiet suspicion. Yet, for all the talk, no one truly expected new developments. That changed on a rainy afternoon, nearly 20 years after she disappeared. An abandoned storage unit was being cleared after years of unpaid rent. Among the dusty boxes and forgotten furniture, workers found a small cardboard box sealed with tape. Inside were personal items that had once belonged to Emily, a pink hairbrush with strands of her hair still tangled in it, a diary with worn edges, and a faded photograph of her standing beside an unfamiliar man. The discovery reignited the investigation and unearthed the possibility that Emily's disappearance was not as random as many had believed. The diary found in the storage unit became the most significant lead in 2 decades. Most of the entries were innocent and ordinary, notes about schoolwork, friendships, and her love for drawing. But the last few pages told a different story. The handwriting was shaky, the sentences shorter, almost as if written in a rush. Emily described meeting someone she called a friend, someone who promised to take her somewhere safe. She hinted at being afraid at home, mentioning the nights I can't sleep and the door that never stays locked. The words were vague, but the fear between the lines was unmistakable. The photograph in the box was sent for analysis. It showed Emily smiling faintly beside a man in his late 20s. He was later identified as Mark Rivers, a former tenant who had rented the basement of the Thompson home years before she vanished. His name was already in the original case files. He had been questioned in 2005 because of his criminal record involving minors, but back then there had been no evidence linking him to Emily's disappearance. He had moved out of Greywood just days before she was reported missing. Armed with the new evidence from the diary, investigators began tracking him down. After weeks of searching, they found Rivers living in isolation in a weathered cabin deep in the woods, 2 states away. A search of the cabin uncovered a box of Emily's childhood drawings, a sweater she had worn in old photographs, and a carved wooden music box engraved with her initials. These items suggested she had been there at some point. Yet, despite the discovery, there was still no sign of Emily herself. The evidence pointed to her survival long after the day she vanished, but where she had gone next remained a mystery. When investigators confronted Mark Rivers at his remote cabin, his reaction was calm but guarded. He denied harming Emily and insisted that she had come to him willingly on the night she disappeared. According to his account, she had shown up at his basement door in tears, begging for help. Rivers claimed she told him she could no longer stay in her own home, speaking of nights filled with fear and a constant sense of being watched. He said he believed her and decided to help her escape, but panicked once the police search began. Rivers described moving her from place to place, keeping her away from areas where she might be recognized. He insisted his only goal was to protect her, but his choices meant she was cut off from her friends, her school, and any chance of a normal life. Eventually, he said, he placed her in the care of people he trusted, far from Greywood. While his words painted him as a rescuer, investigators remained skeptical. They dug deeper into his story, cross-checking it with travel records, witness statements, and old phone logs. That's when a chilling truth emerged: Emily's own mother had been aware of her location for years. Evidence showed she had secretly communicated with her daughter and even sent her money, all while telling the public she had no idea where she was. Her reasoning, according to private messages found on an old computer, was that she feared Emily's father would find her and cause more harm. The revelation shifted the investigation entirely. What had been seen as a tragic case of a child taken by a stranger now appeared to be a carefully hidden escape, protected by someone who should have been leading the search. Emily was finally located in a quiet coastal town hundreds of miles from Greywood. She was living under a different name, working in a small cafe, and raising 2 young children. At 32, she was no longer the frightened 12-year-old who had vanished, but the past still lived in her eyes. When investigators approached her, she was reluctant to speak, but eventually confirmed parts of Mark Rivers' account. She said she had indeed run to him the night she disappeared, desperate to escape her father's abuse. She described the years that followed as a blur of constant movement, changing locations before anyone could find her. Emily admitted that her mother had been in contact with her for most of that time. It had been her mother's voice on the phone during lonely nights, her mother's letters that kept her going, and her mother's instructions that she must never reach out to her brother, Daniel. She explained that this was to protect the plan and avoid the risk of the truth slipping out. While her mother's intentions had been to shield her from harm, Emily said the isolation and secrecy came at a heavy cost. The investigation led to the arrest of her father, who was charged with multiple counts of abuse. Mark Rivers was taken into custody for his role in concealing a missing child, despite his claims of acting as a protector. Emily's mother faced charges for obstruction and withholding evidence. The Thompson family, once a picture of small-town normalcy, was left in ruins. In Greywood, the truth spread quickly, replacing years of rumor with a reality far more complicated than anyone had imagined. The case became a grim reminder that danger does not always come from strangers, and that sometimes the deepest wounds are inflicted within the walls of home.